For the computer. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Join me, good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler from Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on day 594 of the hostages' captivity. We're thinking about them constantly. We're also recording this the day after. This is not even 24 hours after the murder of Sara Milgrim and Yaron Lishinsky. We're still, I think, as a community, reeling from this recent murder, this tragic event in Washington, D.C. These two beautiful people, young people, were about to be engaged. The story is just heartbreaking on so many levels, and it underscores how fragile I think we are in this moment. We get all of the bulletins from our local police forces and all the people who monitor anti-Semitism, and we're just on guard. We're on extra guard now. We feel that there's a tremendous vulnerability, and this is, you know, um, part of a whole set of circumstances, the tragic circumstance. Nobody should have to have endured this, and the families, of course, and the ripples into the different community, the diplomatic community, the AJC community, and of course the American Jewish community all together. So we are thinking about them, and I don't know if you have what to say. There's not much to say in the tragic circumstances stance like this, but trying to formulate
Yeah.
both
I
words of
mean, you
comfort and
know,
condolences and strength for our communities.
so one of the famous, you know, statements in a book that was written, I think, in the perhaps in the 50s or the 60s, it's a long essay called Kodo Dido Fek by Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, the voice of my beloved Knox, and it's a religious, it's an expression of religious Zionism. And what did Zionism mean coming back to Jewish community coming back to life after the Shoah? And in the famous lines, Rav Soloveitchik says, we have two covenants as Jews. We have Brit Yehud u Brit Goral. Brit Yehud, the covenant that we have towards some destiny in the future, and it's about the world that we want to build, and the world. We'll talk about this as we talk about the Parasha. A vision of a good society, of a just society, of fairness, of human worth, and while it is true that we in America have our own, very, very serious disputes about what would constitute a good America, in Israel, al achad kama v'kama, times a million, what Israeli society has differences about what yiudim, what ya'ad, what destination, what destiny we want to build. But we do think that to be a Jew is not just to survive, but to point towards some sort of future destiny. But there's also a Brit Goral, the covenant of fate, that whatever happens to us, we all have to share these fates. And it's a grimmer kind of vision. People will often say, it's anti-Semitic to blame Jews everywhere for the bad things that Israel does. And I suppose that is true. To hold this Jew responsible for what other Jews do is maybe in some respects unfair. But I also think it's kind of implicated in the Brit Goral concept that what Israel does, the meaning of our Jewish life is also connected to Israel and its struggles. And I feel like, my in the heartbreak that we feel about this senseless, pointless murder, like why shoot two people on the streets of Washington to protest what's going on in the Middle East? It's just beyond senseless. But it is a reminder to me that there is no escaping. I don't want to escape it. But everything that happens to Israel affects us. Everything that happens to us affects Israel. Everything that happens to Jews everywhere, it really is a seamless connection. And these two tragic, these two 26-year-old people, lovely people, tragically, um, are an example that we Jews do share a fate. And sometimes it's a very difficult fate to bear, but That's what we do. We commit ourselves to bearing it. I have a small problem, gentlemen. My computer is about to reboot against my will.
We'll pause. We are back, and we're going to talk about the two concluding parshiot of Vayikra. This is Bar Behukotai. Their parshas are joined this year, double parsha. We're not going to spend much time on Behukotai, even though Behukotai is the summary blessings and curses, the consequences of following the mitzvot, not following the mitzvot. There's a lot of good material in there, but we want to focus a little bit on Behar, which I think, we come to this parsha every year and we're gonna, experience this. Um, it is a program for the sabbatical cycle, 7-year cycle. The land is to lie fallow in the seventh year. So let's just hit this issue right on, which is this a real program or is this an idyllic program? Is this a practical manual or is this a utopian manual? And if it's practical, how does it get um, enacted? And if it's utopian, what's its purpose? Barry, I'm going to turn to you on this because I'm perplexed on that question.
So I think the answer to your question in many ways is in Parakafeh Pasuk Kaf Gimel, 20, chapter 25, verse 23, V'ha'aretz lo timacher l'tzmitut, ki li ha'aretz, ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. That the land should not be sold because it is mine, because you are resident aliens with me. And what I think is important here to recognize is that the program here is to remind the Israelite that they are renters and not owners. The landlord is God, and they live in the land at his deference, shall we say. And
Pleasure.
what that, excuse me?
You are employed at the pleasure of
Right. And you
You're
can get your
an
walking
at-will
papers
employee,
at any time.
right.
And what the Israelites here are reminded is that the idea of being a tenant means that you have no right to oppress other people because you are actually no better than them, no matter what you may think. In our world, we know that the owners often have significant advantage over the tenants, despite what progress we've made in this area, because they hold all the cards. Well, the card holder here is God, and
It,
we are his employees.
it seems,
And
go ahead, keep finishing.
the last thing I just want to say is we are judged by how we treat our fellow employees. And we have to be on guard always that things not go to our head.
It seems that the Torah has this hyper vigilant sense of awareness of the plight of a slave, and that of course is rooted in the historical experience. I don't want to say the mythic experience, but that's the story. The story of the Torah is here is a people. The people is enslaved. The people is redeemed. They come out of their slavery and they have to constitute themselves as a new people on a land, and so therefore this awareness of enslavement. I want to, as a proposition, it infuses almost every single piece of biblical legislation.
Right,
Agree?
but I think we have to be careful here to distinguish between the resident alien and the slave. The slave is owned by a master. The resident alien is someone who's not quite part of the community. And I think the tendency is, and we can see this throughout history, is that people see themselves as far more important than they may actually be in God's eyes. That what is of critical to keep in mind is that the person who the slave is not likely to ever confuse himself with the master, but the resident alien might think that he's a citizen. And this kind of citizenship is not what the Torah is talking about here.
I'm a little bit not everything you said speaks to me religiously. I'm not saying it's not a good description of the
Okay.
text, but there are pieces of it that, religiously speaking, I think that, first of all, it's clearly correct. Many times in the Torah, it worries about people's arrogance, and that you will say, damn, I'm good, and kochi be'otzem yadi astali kol hachayil hazeh. I got so rich because of my own great effort, and we want to temper that, but we want to temper it in a way that still ends up conferring dignity and, like, total vote of confidence that you are in fact worthy partners to the covenant, because God needs you to be a worthy partner of the covenant. That is a powerful person, not a powerless person. So I want to have that sense of humility, but I want to inculcate it in a way that affirms, human agency and human power. So I'm I'm hearing it in my. I do think that there are aspects of this that look utopian and don't look practical. I want to observe that if you really limit the amount of work that people can do in the sabbatical year, and then the double sabbatical of the Jubilee year, there's going to be less food. And if part of this is to ameliorate poverty, as it clearly is, because that's the context in which this is stated in Leviticus, it's not a very good way to eliminate poverty by reducing the food supply. It's the opposite. It seems highly impractical, that people will have enough to eat. Of course, it's an utopian blessing that God will just give it to you, but it's a little counterintuitive there. But I want to just there's a word ringing in my ear, the word jubilee. I'm not 1,000% sure that this is true, but I think that the word yovel really refers to the horn, the shofar, the
Yeah.
trumpet blast. And it's called the Jubilee year because it's signified with the trumpet blast. And I'm reminded that in Exodus 19, before the revelation at Sinai, God keeps telling Moses, "Don't let anybody get too close. It'll be fatal for them. If they touch the mountain, they will be zapped." But bimshoch hayovel hema ya'alu bahar. But when the horn continues, or when the horn is blown, or whatever, there is some sort of signal that you can come to Sinai. I'm not offering that this is the semantic meaning here, but I'm hearing the poetic echo in my ear that Sinai is realized in this program of equality and dignity for the poor. And when can you go to Mount Sinai? Bimshoch hayovel,
Well,
when the Jubilee gets practiced.
would you kind of cast your line out from this this parak, this chapter? It begins with Behar Sinai. It is, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Behar Sinai. God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. You know, it's very odd, and of course the commentaries pick up on this. Ma'inyan Shemitah Latzil Har Sinai. That's Rashi's quote unquote famous question. Why are they talking about the sabbatical year at Mount Sinai? And that's not the question. The question may be, how does sabbatical legislation comport with the Sinaitic ideal? How does this vision of the world in which people are free and that there's an economy, that we have a fairly agrarian economy. It is an economy of antiquity, so it's people have to subsist off the land. Up until maybe 100 years ago, I guess, I don't know what, 80%, 90% of the population was agrarian. It's a fairly modern phenomenon
80%.
that people live in cities now. So people had an intuitive understanding of the land. Not at Mount Sinai, though. They're standing there. They're slaves. They're freed
There's
slaves,
also scared to death.
and they're scared to death, right? But it's not an accident that these laws about the sabbatical, about a reset, about freedom, are at Sinai.
I want to just add one more thing here, that what seems to be important here is the tension that we all experience between the temporariness of life and the permanence. We all quest for a certain permanence, And this legislation reminds us that what is truly eternal in this world is the land, not the human being. And so every 7 years, there has to be a reorganization, so to speak, where the farmer takes a break from the land. And every 50 years, the slaves return to their original families and the land returns to its rightful owner as a way of reminding us that even in the cycles of our lives, the things that we think are permanent are not destined to last forever. And I think that might provide the religious significance that you're looking for, Jeremy.
That's great.
What it means basically is that probably once in the course of a lifetime, a biblical lifetime, depending on where you were born in the cycle. I guess people who lived only 40 years and were born at year one of the cycle may not make it to the Jubilee, uh, but they may experience this grand reset. I was reading something. We are still in the Jewish century of many, many important events. We are. What is this year? 5785.
5.
And so we're in the 57th century, the 57th Jewish century. Uh, you know, we are still in the Jewish century of the Holocaust and the state of Israel, which is a kind of mind-blowing idea. We're still in
And
an epoch.
yeah,
We're in an epoch, and I think if you count time based on what epoch you are in, what reign, what era, in the Catholic Church, of course, they just made a transition to a new pontifical era. They seem to be getting shorter. I don't know, but um, you know, they these are place marks for your life. I just want to go back to one other thing, which is part of what makes these rules kind of inaccessible to us is that we live so far away from the farm. I guess the three of us don't have much agricultural experience. I picked avocados one year on a kibbutz. Uh, I, you know,
I was on a kibbutz for almost 6 months.
6 months. Okay, so what did you learn? I mean, about agriculture in 6 months.
Well, I think the first thing you learn is there's nothing quite so good taste-wise as food fresh from the ground
It's interesting.
or off the tree. Like I remember once we were picking grapefruit, I think I had 11 in one day, which I can never do here in the United States. My stomach would implode. And carrots were so sweet when you pulled them from the ground and wiped the dirt off and just ate them.
Interesting.
And there's something extraordinary about that experience that you do something and things grow.
Mhm.
But I think the real lesson, certainly when I was 17, that I learned is that everyone should do kibbutz just to get it out of their system, and then you go on and have your life.
what you learned from 6 months in the kibbutz is that you wanted to go to rabbinical school, buddy. So I'm glad somebody's a
Look,
farmer.
we have a certain romantic ideal of the farm. I still, I mean, I think about growing, gardening. I mean, I don't. I'm terrible at that stuff. Awful, because it takes consistent, painstaking work. You can't go away. You can't. You have to water it. You have to weed it, and I- you know, I don't have the time. I don't have the
No,
wherewithal to.
you do, but you choose not to.
No,
I
of
mean,
course
there's certainly they require attention, but I think it's within all of our capacity. And I wonder, in light of our earlier conversation, if maybe we don't give up too much by not participating in those activities. That what we really need to do, and maybe this is also part of the legislation, is especially in an urban era, create ways where we can connect to the land.
Okay, or create.
I have even less experience than the two of you, but what you just said really resonates with me. I'm sure I am being romantic about it, but I think that that's quite correct. I would also point out one other thing about this whole agricultural system and the second chance of a jubilee is that one of the premise ideas is that when Joshua, the original Chalukah, when Joshua assigns the tribes to the various locations it is presumed in the Bible's mindset that everybody gets a fair distribution for their clan, and that's why the daughters of Tzlopchad, as we will later see them, are such a big deal. There's a family, Mr. Tzlopchad of the Hefer people. He's got five daughters, and if they marry out, then nobody will ever have his land. So the Bible institutes this novel new idea that if there are no male heirs, then the female heirs should get it, and not brothers or cousins or whatever. But part of the premise idea is that when there is that fair distribution of land per clan in Bible times, the Yovel reconnects their descendants to that plot of land. So the emotional, or I guess a certain sense, it's nostalgic, but there's that deep, deep, deep land connection. This is my family's plot of land. All of the three of us, I know, don't live in the places where we grew up. Our parents didn't live, necessarily in the places that they grew up. And biblical people I just think that they had a whole different love relationship to given spots of land that they felt responsible for, and that it was just wrong. It was just like wrong with a capital W if your economic situation alienated you from your ancestral holding. It's called in Bible terms, stay achuzah, your inherited field. So while it is true that these laws also serve to undermine our sense that we own the land, in the converse way, they serve to reinforce that this land, this particular plot of land, and I belong together.
So let me ask
So,
you this question. I'm going to ask a rabbinic question, which is, given that we are not agricultural people, given that we are not, we own or rent, we have a certain title to a certain piece. I do own my house. It's not in the land of Israel. It's in the land of New Jersey. Uh, uh, but at a certain point, I suppose that this land is not going to there's no ancestral inclination towards this land. It'll get
so
sold like in the course of the events of life eventually.
right. When Jeremy was talking, that's what came to my mind is that the closest analogy I think we have to attachment to the land is an attachment to the house. But the big difference is there are very few people that we know that live in a house multi-generationally, right? The idea is that your house, you're going to end up selling. I just, I'm in the process of selling my house. Now, there was never any expectation that my children will live there, although I did raise the possibility with one of my kids who would like to come back to Long Island, but she was not interested in the house for
Right.
herself.
Okay, so
And
there
I
may
think
be,
maybe again that's part of the urban suburban world that we live in. And again, I maybe we don't pay enough attention to that. Maybe
well,
we
is that
should
it?
be raising the issue with our children about where they should live rather than letting them do whatever they want.
It's probably a very modern idea that you are no longer tied to a specific property and that your generations are not, and that every generation is going to go out on its own and create its own property
This,
or
this, yeah,
attachments.
this deeply ties to what's going on in the world, and um, and the attachments that our two warring peoples have to the land of Israel, the Holy Land, or whatever you would want to call it. I mean, I remember the late, very eccentric, peace-oriented settler rabbi, Menachem Fruman of Tekoa, who was, on the one hand, he was a West Bank settler. On the other hand, he was a peace activist and had a relationship even with Sheikh Yassin, the founder of Hamas. Uh, I shudder to think, how that would go down. But I remember reading an article in which he said the truth is that I mean, this is a very, very far-reaching claim, and I'm sure it could be disputed. But what Rabbi Fruman said was, you Tel Aviv people are not going to make peace with the Palestinians. You think this is about, your apartments. You think this is a kind of a real estate matter, and we should be able to come to some agreement. The Palestinians and I, he said, understand that this is about Holy Land. And
Yeah.
so we are the ones who are going to be able to compromise about it, but we think about the land in the same way. And maybe there's something to that. Maybe we lose our ability to think as deeply as we might if we think that this is about apartments, and instead think it's about rootedness in a given piece of land.
Yeah, I just want to make a footnote. There was I listened to the Daniel Gordis podcast, and he had a guest on it, Hanan Schlesinger, who was
Well,
saying,
he's a follower of Ralph Fruman.
yeah, okay, it's well worth listening to or reading the transcript of. He speaks in the similar language, and of course, it's all about understanding that there are two peoples that are that really have this connection to the land in ways that are part of different stories, obviously, and that listening to the other may at least open the pathway to some kind of coexistence. But so back to the Parsha in the sense that it raises. I don't want to get too philosophical, but it raises a real theological problem, which is really, the verse that is the really verse, and I would love your take on it, especially Jeremy, because we did kind of wink to this before, which is it says, given that the sabbatical is going to come on the seventh year, it's going to pose a bunch of problems. The verse is chapter 25, verse 20. "V'chi tomru ma nochal b'shana hashvi'it." What are we going to eat in the seventh year? So, what do you make out of the Jew who says, "What are we going to eat? What is it about us that we're going to always ask these questions?" And isn't it interesting? Can you elaborate here on the kind of the way that the Torah understands our people?
I don't know what to
So
do with that exactly. I mean, there's a promise, obviously, that devotional living, keeping the mitzvot, which are, which are ethical, but they are also worshipful, that it's going to work out for you. But I mean, I guess I didn't really think about this until you posed the question that 25:20 comes along and says that, like, the attitude of the pasuk or the attitude of the imagined Israelite in the pasuk is,
What are we going
this make no sense. You're telling me this is a good religion? This makes no sense.
to eat? Right.
so that's where I think its central significance is. The line that came to me this past Shabbat when I was talking to the rabbi of the shul I no longer go to, um, is that faith is earned, not given. And we sometimes forget that faith is a navigational tool. It doesn't bring us to the destination, but it does help us get there. And it's very natural for the Israelite to wonder what he's going to eat when he's just been told, okay, it's year 6, you're done, take a year off, but don't worry, I'm going to have food for you for 3 years. I don't know that that's so reassuring. But the meaning of faith in part is responding to the difficulties in life and measuring them against our assumptions. And if we start with the religious assumption that God is the ruler of the world, then we find a way to navigate that, no matter who we are and no matter what the experiences are in that given year. And sometimes we'll have better times and easier times, and sometimes we'll have increasingly difficult times.
So I want to take a different tack on this, which is that there is this place for faith, and I want to make uh, the case that you're making, which is this is all about a person saying, "I'm going to rely on God," but this is also planting, pardon that, the idea
It was a
You can't
good
plant.
one.
You cannot plant in this year.
in the farmer's
Even
mind
you, Elliot.
that he's got to hedge this. He's got to create some insurance policy, and that there has to be. In other words, if you were to say to me, "It's okay, it's okay," like you can use this idea for retirement thinking, or for the way that you are going to save for your future. This idea would not fly in a financial planner's office, which is, oh, rely on God. Rely on God. Because when you have your sabbatical, you'll be able to afford it because God will provide. That's not the way it's going to happen unless you plan for it, unless you put it away, unless make all the provisions, the necessary provisions that one must make in a modern context. Um, you're going to be lost. And I think that may speak to the ancient context also. And here again, back to the fact that most of us really don't understand the mindset of the farmer. The mindset of the farmer was what's going to be this year and what's going to be next year. And that you're looking for your seed crop and you're looking for the patterns of weather. Look, why is it that farmers produce the Farmer's Almanac? Why is that they are so interested in patterns of weather? They are so interested in what will happen in the future that they do want to create a way of guaranteeing that which cannot be guaranteed. And so what you do is, I think you become a little bit of a Joseph. You sock it away. You have to think about this because you never know what the next harvest is going to be. Even
So
if God says that it's going to happen, I think.
if you want insight into the farmer, read the novels of Wendell Berry.
I looked at that, yes.
And they're wonderful, and they speak to what we had talked about earlier because those these are multi-generational people on the same patch of land.
Right.
But there was one other point that I wanted to make that seems to have escaped me.
I love how widely read you are in American
The
writers.
literature.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
awesome. But just in the skeptical speaker here of verse 20, I relate to this person insofar as one of the things we say in this religion is "Ein somchin ala nes," don't rely on a miracle, and you have to do, with your cooperative, you got to be God's shutaf l'kadosh baruch hu b'maaseh bereshit. You got to be God's partner in creating the world, and I alluded before that as an anti-poverty measure, the Shemitah system would seem to have a significant design flaw in that there will be quantitatively less food in the absence of a miracle. And I think in this religion, we generally speaking think that God helps those who help themselves. I mean, one of the most important agricultural comments is, when they first start getting the manna in Exodus chapter 16 or 17 or whatever that is, it says that they will keep this ceremonial senet man, they will keep this jar of manna ad boam el eretz no shavet until they reach the settled land. And then when Joshua in Joshua chapter 1 or 2 or whatever that is at the beginning of the book of Joshua says that they crossed over the Jordan in spectacular fashion, and then they ate me'avor haaretz, then they ate from the produce of the land, and the manna stopped, and they ate from the produce of the land. And I read that as a great affirmation that miracle food is appropriate, not Miracle Whip, which is never appropriate, but miracle food is appropriate for like some mythic time in the past when you were wandering the desert under Moshe's leadership. But in an actual place, you have to be an actual farmer. And so there's a way in which that kind of imagined speaker of verse 20, that guy's got his head on straight, that
So go on.
that
I'm
you
sorry.
should that you're gonna have to if you want Misha Toreach be'erev Shabbos yochal b'Shabbos. If the person who works on Friday afternoon is the one who has food on Shabbos.
So what I wanted to say earlier that just came back to me is that Shemitah and Yovel are actually a great leveler because everyone is, to mix a metaphor, in the same boat. And so when you wake up in the seventh year, you look around at the people and you realize you are all in the same position. None of you are doing anything actively to produce on the land, and your responsibility is not just to yourself, but it's to your entire community.
Interesting.
And I think this is a way that it brings God into the world, even if the harvest was not quite as bountiful as God Himself promised.
I'm just looking at we're just about out of time, but there is one phrase that I want to touch on, which becomes like I think it's a good sermonic prompt, which is the next verse says "Vitziviti et birchati lachem," and it's tziviti. I will ordain. I will I will command my blessing to you. Vitziviti et birchati lachem, which is almost like I'm going to guarantee it for you. I guarantee you a blessing. And the phrase occurs just a few times in the rest of Tanakh in different forms. But I thought, what a great idea, what a great phrase that could could you say that God ordains a blessing? A prayer that we have would be, may God ordain a blessing for us. May God, I don't want to talk in,
Right. Wouldn't we just say, may God bless us?
I want
Like
God to be mitzvah, a bracha.
Yevarechecha Adonai?
I want God to be mitzvah, a bracha. I want it, I feel like there's a certain strength to that phrase, which is that it's really laser focused on this. It's
It's Psalm 133.
33, in Hine Matovu Manayim.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Ketal Hermon sheyored al Harei Tzion. The dew of the Golan Heights rolls all the way down to Jerusalem. Kisham tziva Adonai et habracha chayim ad olam. Because there God has ordained blessing. Kisham tziva Adonai et habracha chayim ad haolam, everlasting life.
Yes. So I think it's a great prayer. It's a great prayer for all of us, especially in a very tragic time that we have experienced over the last 24 hours, and of course over the last 594 days. We pray that God ordain a blessing for us, the blessing of restitution and recovery, the freedom of these hostages, and of course, now that these two young people have been murdered, the blessing of comfort, the blessing, may their memory be a blessing. That I think is incumbent on all of us to protect ourselves, to fortify ourselves, to strengthen Jewish life as the answer to the hatred directed against us in the most violent ways. May that be the blessing that is ordained for us during these days, I think. And with
Amen.
we can probably conclude our Parsha talk. We look forward to you coming to see us again and listen to us. But in the meantime, thank you for watching and thank you for your time here. And look forward to seeing you again next edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.